Welcome back to the Be Code by Tiffany, where we unlock the woman that you were born to be through the 5 pillars of being bold, independent, tenacious, confident, and honest. Today's episode is one I know that is going to touch so many women because we're talking about something that happens behind closed doors every single day. We're talking about betrayal, and we're talking about fear, and we're talking about losing yourself in a marriage and then somehow finding the courage to rebuild your life from the ashes. My guest today is someone that I have had the honor of coaching through one of the darkest chapters of her life. She went from being a stay-at-home wife and mother for over 2 decades to discovering that her husband had been living a secret life involving infidelity and prostitutes. And what followed could have destroyed her. But instead, it became the catalyst that actually transformed her. Today, she is a different woman, and I can contest to that. She is stronger and happier and more independent and more alive. And I want you to hear this story because if you're sitting in pain right now, and if you're afraid to leave something that no longer serves you, or if you're wondering whether there is life on the other side of heartbreak, I want this episode to be proof that there absolutely is. So let's welcome today's guest, B. Hello, B.
Hi, Tiffany.
I just want to say thank you so much for being here. You were one of my very first clients that I started coaching. And I don't know, how many years ago was that?
3 years ago.
3 years ago. Okay.
Mhm.
So before we get into everything that happened, I first of all want people to understand who you were before this new chapter. So if you can tell us a little about your life and what did your marriage look like from the outside?
So I met my husband 14 years ago, and we were married for 13 or so. The end got a little funky. So I don't know how many years to really count, but I think our marriage looked fun and stable from the outside. And for a little bit of background, we met while I was in the US as an exchange student, and I got pregnant really, really fast with him and was able to finish some school. And then I went back to where I grew up, born and raised outside of the US, had a baby, and then came back with the baby when she was just a few weeks old. And so our marriage was based on, not based on, but I was brand new in this country and I felt very alone. I didn't know anything. He was also a parent already to a 5-year-old. And so, in every way, I felt like I was tagging along with someone who knew how to do everything because he was a native to this country. He was already a parent. He was older than me. So it felt a little bit like I was just granted access to something someone else had figured out.
That's powerful, by the way. What you just said is very powerful. Like you felt like you
Yeah.
were granted access. Can you tell me what that means when you say that you were granted access? Because it sounds like a role that is subservient to an empowered role. So can you explain what you mean by that?
I think it's a role that I've always taken on. And I was going to mention the whole idea of me losing myself in the marriage really started before I even met him. I think I lost myself somewhere in childhood. So when I entered this marriage, it was really just, it had to be that way because that's what I was looking for, ways that I could be undeserving and a little less than someone else or a little bit less knowledgeable about something. So I would always take on a role where I needed guidance or I needed help. So that's what I meant when I said that.
I appreciate you sharing that. And so what role did you play in your childhood family?
I think I played the role of being a mediator. I grew up with a mom who was, I can't diagnose her, but I think she was depressed and she worked from home. So she was always there. My dad worked outside the home and was not there much. And my mom had a lot of anger. I think I made it my role to prevent her from becoming angry. And so I spent a lot of my time trying to figure out what might please her. And a lot of times that was just being quiet and being invisible, being in my room. Sometimes it meant I would offer to do things that I don't think really 8-year-olds typically offer, like, can I vacuum? Can I clean? Stuff like that. And it didn't really work, obviously. That's not how that works. But so I grew up just feeling like it was my role to protect her mood. So I disappeared. I felt
Yeah.
very much like I disappeared because all the focus was on someone else and I didn't know what I wanted. I just knew I wanted peace.
Yeah. And I hear you, and it sounds like that those sacrifices that you made and the people pleasing, it sounds like that transferred over into your marriage. So, what sacrifices did you feel like you made in your marriage over the years?
Well, I made a huge sacrifice of leaving my country and my family and all of my friends. I had a very stable life where I'm from, and I was in my late 20s, so I had an established adult life. And I think that's one of the biggest sacrifices I made, but also just carried over from childhood, just being invisible or quiet and walking on eggshells, making sure everything was in order so that nobody would be upset. And so to get into a little bit about who he is, a little bit like what I grew up with in my mom, someone that would be angry if things weren't handled, and I would take it on me and blame myself. I would do things that probably shouldn't have to do, at least in order to keep the peace. So I felt very invisible in my marriage.
Okay. And what do you feel like that did to your confidence in just everyday life and your confidence now, where it sounded like you came from a place where you had lots of friends and you had established your life, outside of this country. So now you're in the United States and you have a new baby and a new husband and who has another child. How many more children did you have with your husband?
We ended up having 3 together in total, and so we were a family of 6 with his child. And yes, when I said, I would do everything to keep the peace, that is while also being a mother of 1, 2, or 3 little ones and an older one who I also parented.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that, B. I want to take you back, and I know this might be painful. I know that, I've coached you since then and you've come so far. You actually are one of my favorite clients to coach because you just moved the needle so far from where we started to where you are today. So, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to go back to the moment that kind of changed everything. And if you
Mhm.
feel comfortable, if you can bring us.
Yeah. Yes, I can. I'm happy to. I'm also going to say I might get emotional, but that doesn't bother me. I'm happy to share even through that. I could tell through your intro that it did touch me a little bit. It's been a long time since I shared the story, and I can tell it's ready to be felt again. So, throughout this marriage, like I said, I felt a little bit like a background character, stay at home mom. He had a corporate job and it wasn't a functional marriage. And I am not a psychologist, but I think it's safe to say that there's some narcissism on his part. And the last couple of years of our marriage, he fell into addiction. It started out being one incident, and then he'd come home and be apologetic and sad. But then many months would pass and nothing happened. Everything was fine. He didn't want to talk about it, but I kind of secretly hoped that that was just it and we would forget about that. But it became worse, and he would start disappearing first for a day, then 2 days. And then it became so bad that he would be gone for a week or sometimes a month, and we didn't know where he was. And it was incredibly difficult to be a parent while also being very confused and hurt. And to answer your specific question, it had gotten so bad and we didn't see him at all. But there was a time that he came back to our house and fell asleep on the couch. And I thought, it's time that I find out. I want answers now. And so while he was asleep, I took his phone and I went through it. And although that's not something I'm proud of, I'm glad I did because what I found was the evidence. I was under the impression that his addiction meant he couldn't resist the drugs, went and had a miserable time, sat alone somewhere in a hotel room, and didn't know how to pull himself up. But what I found was evidence that he had completely created a new community of people. He was out all the time with people I had never heard of in hotels and at parties, different clubs. And I saw messages between him and other men about the drugs and other women. And then I saw messages between him and some of these women, pictures, videos, and just messages that I couldn't believe were actually him typing or engaging in any of the things that I saw. I was shocked. And I went through some thoughts that were like, no, someone else must have taken his phone and done this for him, even though there were certain pictures and videos where I could tell it was him. It was denial. I thought I was married to someone I definitely wasn't married to. And that was very, very shocking.
First of all, every time I hear this story, it obviously brings me back to the beginning days of when I was coaching you, and it was a lot. I mean, it was a lot. I remember the numbness and all the different stages that you went through. But can you describe some of the very first emotions that you felt? And then if you can just
Mhm.
let us know some of the
Yeah.
very first emotions that you felt. I know you said shocked.
Yeah, I think I had gone through at this point at least 7 months of this extreme behavior on his part that I knew something was really bad, obviously. So finding out was shocking and just basically for a moment impossible to believe. But at the same time, even though I think this might sound odd, I was relieved that there was answers and that there was a reason.
Were you numb? How did you, in those moments right after you saw what you saw? I know obviously the first is shock and denial. Obviously, you explained that, but was there anger? Was there sadness? What else did you feel in that moment?
There was a lot of anger, there was a lot of sadness, there was probably a lot of all the negative emotions you can think of,
Okay.
but I think there was mostly it's hard to really describe the feeling, but it was a lot of sadness and it was despair. I didn't know what to do from then because in my heart, I knew that I would love this man through anything, including addiction, except for infidelity. And here I sat with all the evidence that he had cheated on me in the most disgusting ways you could possibly cheat on someone. So I knew there was absolutely no way that I would ever be with him or consider reconciling our marriage. So going from knowing that I would love him no matter what and we would always be together to having 100% certainty that that was not a possibility was just so shocking and feeling of betrayal when it all lands on you in one moment is just hard to even grasp. I didn't really know what it was. So the sadness was related a lot to the despair of just not knowing how on earth to move into anything past that point. And I had already felt very alone in the marriage, very alone in parenting, and obviously very alone practically in the last many months because he wasn't even there. Yeah.
So in that moment, did you just want to get out of there? Did you, I mean, I can't even imagine what you were feeling. Here he is home
Mm.
finally, and you've got his phone, and at any time he could wake up. What was your truth? What did you want to do at that moment? You have kids in the house, right?
Yeah.
And you discovered something that your life was not what you thought it was. So, what did you feel like doing?
I think my instinct at the moment was to ask for more answers. And my anger definitely took over several times, kind of wanting to yell at him or just ask for answers. But I knew that there were no answers. And I think I also knew that there was no point in getting more answers to something that was clearly dead. And I'll share another part of the story that I actually kept my knowledge of the infidelity from him for some months because this was over summer break when my kids were off school and they were little at the time and they would basically just wonder where is dad, when is he coming home, what can we do, what fun can we have with dad, and I had no answers. So because I had my own shock and my own feelings and also had to manage them, I decided that I would travel home to where I'm from with the kids for the summer to avoid them just basically sitting around waiting for him, but also knowing that if they waited and he came, what they would find wasn't really something I wanted them around. So I traveled with them. I told him via email that we would be leaving and when we would be back. And for the time between finding out and leaving and past the time that I came back, which was a month later, he didn't know that I had found out about the infidelity. And that was incredibly hard. With the anger and the sadness that I felt and the betrayal, it was incredibly hard to keep that from him.
Yeah. I hear that from a lot of my clients is they need time to process and get their ducks in order and figure out how they're going to approach. But I can't imagine the anger that you're feeling and really wanting to confront the situation and go off on somebody for
Mhm.
betraying you and having to hold that in. And then on top of it, you have 4 children that you're also having to hide your emotions from, and I remember the sessions that we were together, and I know that that was a very difficult thing to do, and I think so many women listening will relate to this because often the betrayal isn't the hardest part. It's actually realizing that the life you thought you had isn't the life you actually had, and that can feel so devastating.
Yeah. And I think that was the shock.
Yeah. One thing that I remember vividly about one of our coaching sessions was your fear. And I remember
Mhm.
we had to coach in your car. So you would leave, and I believe this was even prior to the infidelity or that you when you found out. And I remember
Mhm.
you being so hyper vigilant about anyone who walked by your car. You were like in fight or flight mode. Can you tell me about that and let our audience know like there was a definitive fear that you felt, and I know you obviously feared losing your marriage, but what else did you fear?
I think after the point that I realized our marriage was going to have to end and knowing the full scope of what was really happening, and there was some criminal activity as well that I discovered, I started really wanting to protect the kids from being around that. And he had access to our home. Obviously, nothing had changed in terms of him having the same home as us. He just wasn't using it. So he could basically come home when he wanted to, and he would sometimes. So we have a family member that lived next door. So if I was on the phone with you, for example, the kids were there, and I was afraid that he would come and say, "Hey, kids, come with me. Let's go do whatever." And then being with him in the car and it not being safe. And
Mhm.
I had no way of telling him not to do that. And in fact, I had an experience where I said, "Please don't take them." And he did anyway. And I was very afraid for their safety because I knew that he wasn't in his right mind. So the sessions with you, and in fact, I don't remember all of them. I know what you're talking about, but part of it is a little bit blurry and kind of blacked out. I know I sat in the car and I know the way that I felt, but I'm sure you saw it in a different perspective. I probably looked so bizarre now that I think about it. And the fight or flight was definitely real.
Yeah. And I remember your fear of losing your marriage, but also your fear of surviving without it. I want to talk to you about that. So, what scared you the most?
I think what scared me the most was, first of all, I was in this country basically alone. Obviously, after so many years, I had a network, but it was still something that I wasn't used to tapping into for emergencies and stuff like this. So I was scared of being alone because I didn't know that I had any capabilities by myself. I didn't feel like I was capable. Everything was done by him, or I was either asking permission or feeling I had to at least check in with someone else. So being alone was a major fear. And then I've since my childhood, because it was the way it was, I've always had this sort of, I don't know if it's irrational, but it's a fear of disappearing. So afraid that if I wasn't doing a specific thing, no one could see me. And we're not talking Harry Potter invisibility cloak. I knew I was there, but I was so scared that I didn't matter that it felt like I would disappear. So if I didn't have this marriage, it felt like nothing was left and there was no one to approve of my right actions. So I think the biggest fear was being alone. But then also, when you have a dysfunctional and toxic relationship like this, you can end up in a trauma bond. I know that now because I've researched so much. I had a very hard time just accepting that I was going to have to not be with this person anymore. And that felt very, it hurt, physically hurt to know that I wouldn't be the one for him. And I wouldn't be number one, that he didn't go to me anymore, and I wouldn't be able to go to him. And breaking that trauma bond is probably the most difficult thing I've ever done. Basically, to stop caring about someone that you have made your whole reality. In fact, I feel the feelings right now. I almost get nauseous and it like hurts in my stomach to think of having to break that. So the fear was a lot of different things, but definitely cutting the ties and then ultimately being alone. And
Yeah.
if I can share a little bit about what happened later,
Yeah, I'd love to hear.
about a year or so later, he was arrested and went to jail for 2 years. Now, when I look at it, it's been, I mean, since we had our very, very difficult sessions, it's been 3 years. And I can say now, and I've been able to for a while, say that I'm very glad that it happened. And I'm very glad that it became so bad because I had no other option but to leave. And if I hadn't discovered the infidelity, like I said, I would have probably loved him through the addiction and done everything that I could. And if you know anything about addiction, there is nothing you can do if you're not the one with the addiction. I just thought I could. So I'm very grateful that it became so bad and that I discovered it. And when I said I looked through his phone, I'm not proud of it, but I'm glad that I did it because I wouldn't have been able to move in any direction away from him if I hadn't done that.
Yes. And I don't know if you recall, we've coached since, obviously all this happened and we've continued coaching here and there. But I
Mhm.
know that, you also were financially dependent on him. And that was also a big fear because now you had to not only be the mom, but you had to step into a role that you had never, or for at least a while, had ever been in. And now you had to become the provider. So if you can tell us that. And then, of course, I'd like to address later the flip the switch, what we worked on when we worked together, so that women can understand that there is a blessing in this story. So, and obviously you just explained some of it, but can you tell us about now you had to step into a new role that was very unfamiliar and what you had to do?
Yeah. So what I had to do first, I was gone out of the country for a month, and when I came back, I had to sort of put things into action. I had to find an attorney who'd help me not only get a divorce, but protect my kids. And I don't think I'm going to go into too much detail about what that means, but when you are dealing with someone that isn't in their right mind, certain things are put in place through the
Mhm.
court, and that was incredibly scary. And I felt like because I was still trauma bonded to this man, I felt like I was betraying him by protecting the kids from him. And I felt like I was doing something bad. And now I know I wasn't. I was doing the right thing, but it felt very like part of me wanted him not to ever find out that I had done that behind his back. Yeah. So those were some of the things I had to do that really felt very counterintuitive to loving someone and wanting to love someone, but then doing things to break that apart. And then I didn't have a job. He was providing for us. And I then had to figure out how to start working and making money for us and keep our home and pay off our bills. And when I didn't know how to pay our rent, I didn't know how to really do anything because everything was handled by him. So not only was it overwhelming emotionally, but it was also really overwhelming practically. I had to figure things out about insurance and stuff I didn't know how to do, and let alone in a foreign country. So that was very exhausting and scary.
I remember when you were going through this time and you were stepping into a role that was so challenging and so new. But I know when we worked together, we tried to create excitement out of it. And I remember you didn't trust yourself. I mean, you had never done this before, and rightfully so. You had been a mom, which, by the way, is the biggest role, that you could have played in your children's life, and you were a wife. But I do remember this story, and I don't know if you recall it, but one of our most powerful sessions that I feel like we had was in your car. We were pulled over, and a lot of times you were crying and you were exhausted and depleted. And now to hear that you don't even remember some of these sessions, I could imagine because it was a very heavy energy back then, and it went pretty low. It went as low as anyone can go, and I know there were days that you couldn't even get out of bed, and you felt so hopeless, and I remember you wondered if you were ever gonna be okay again, and I remember one session in particular where you told me you couldn't even get out of bed that day. You felt broken, and you were defeated, and you felt like your life was over, and I
Mhm.
remember you telling me that you couldn't go on anymore, and I know you didn't mean that you do something harmful to yourself, but if you can, I don't know if you remember that day, but if you could tell us that day. And then I remember by the end of the session, something shifted because we actually turned, the problem and you finding out about his infidelity into the catalyst for you making the decision to leave a marriage that you had been not wanting to leave, but knowing that this was going to be it. This was, like you said before, that this you finding out you weren't gonna go back, and this was the shift that happened, and I remember, I don't know if you recall, but you couldn't get out of bed that day, but by the end of our session, I think I had you dancing in your living room by the end of the call. I don't know if
Mhm.
you recall that. But if you can let the audience know how you flip the switch from going from finding something out to now understanding that this is actually what you needed. So, and I just want to explain to the audience that one of the things I do is I coach my clients on flipping the switch, and the situation doesn't always change immediately, but it helps your perspective change. And when your perspective changes, your power returns. And B, I remember challenging you and asking you a question. What if this isn't happening to you? What if this is happening for you?
Mhm.
And I think you had a very strong reaction. How did you feel when I said that? And can you tell everyone how you flipped the switch, how you went from taking something so catastrophic and traumatizing to a mom and wife? How could you teach others and what happened with you through this process of flipping the
Mhm.
switch that I coached you on?
I think for me, and what you just shared, just to clarify, I have never been suicidal, and I never was, and I know that that was not what you meant,
Yes.
but it's just to clarify. And it is true, I had a hard time not just getting out of bed, but moving. I had days, many days in a row where I would pick the kids up from school and barely knowing how to do that, which sounds strange now, but it's true. And I would bring them home and we would get in the door and they would come inside, start doing what kids do. And I would, as soon as I closed the front door, I would fall to the ground and lay on the floor. And they would come up and be like, "What are you doing?" And I would say, I just need, I just need a little bit of time. I'm exhausted. And I didn't know how to take a next step. I had accomplished something so big, picking them up from school and finally making it home. Now they're safe with me. What's the next step? Most likely, you know, dinner is happening shortly after you pick your kids up from school. I didn't know how to make that happen. And so I don't know if it comes across really the way it felt, but it was so devastating to take small little steps every day. I also lost my appetite for about 6 months through this process. So I was out of energy. I was in my head. I was sad and I was worried. And I felt like a failure because as a mom, you don't want to. And here comes the emotions. But as a mom, you don't want to look like that to your kids or to the outside world. There's a piece of it that's embarrassing and it's just a failure is what it feels like. But so just to explain that that was how low it was and that's how exhausted I was. And you and I would have these calls and a lot of times they started out with, "Look, Tiffany, I don't know what's going on. I don't know how to move forward." And then going through the process of ultimately trying to flip the switch, which is hard because you don't even know there's a switch sometimes. But I think for me, and this is why I started out saying I've never been suicidal ever, even through all this, I had this just knowing that I had to survive this. And it didn't feel like living, but surviving and finding out that it's on me to make changes and to take action and that life can be about me because for so long it really forever it had been about someone else.
first my mom and then whoever, you know, I could put my attention on, but then for a long time also on my husband, and realizing little by little that I had the right to make things about me, like you said, returning the power to me was so liberating and scary too, because taking action in a completely different direction that you've ever tried is difficult and scary, but there was something so liberating in realizing, look, I can do something. And if I flip the switch to that, knowing that it's about me, there's something I can do. I can take a little action. And then, you said I ended up dancing in my kitchen, I believe. And at least I think what happened was I committed to doing that on the call and then went back home and put on some music. And, you don't just put on a banger and start moving, but it was probably a slow process. And that's really what happened. And little by little, I realized I don't have to only focus on others. I can focus on me. And I've been betrayed so bad that I might as well take little steps and put some power on myself. And I also want to say, for a long time, after realizing these things in very little bits at a time, I went into some time where I became kind of delusional in pursuing my survival. I would tell myself things that were not true, but I want it to be true. Like, I'm great, I'm strong, I'm amazing, this is going to be so good. Because I had to have some of those feelings in my life. If I didn't, it was misery. So there was a delusional approach to surviving. And I think it helped me to sort of have something. And it felt like, well, if I pretend that something is good or awesome or amazing, sometimes it was just, look, I'm surviving. But if I told myself that things could move in the right direction and believed it for a moment, I could move through my day. And that's what helped me survive, just time passing and realizing these things a little bit more over time. And then ultimately, ending up with the power on me.
I love that so much, B. This is where I really want listeners to lean in because nobody wants to hear that their pain might be a blessing right when they're in the middle of it, right? But today, looking back, I mean, obviously you see it so differently and you have to go through it. You can't rush through it. And I know it was about baby steps. It was, we had to create affirmations for you. Like you said, you had to believe that there were positive things through and at the end of that very dark tunnel that you were in. And I know that the actual, the biggest pain of finding out that all the things your husband was doing, it was a catalyst for your freedom. And,
Yeah.
there were things that you'd wanted to do for years, but you never had the courage to do. And I know that this situation forced you to become someone stronger. And so when I said, that wanted you to understand that life was happening for you, not to you, because I wanted you to get out of the victim role. And I wanted
Mhm.
you to understand that you were there whenever your own story and you're writing your own story. So you better write a damn good one. And we're going to start with believing that you can. And I love what you just shared. And I remember telling you too that sometimes your breakdown is actually your breakthrough. And that was, I think, very true for you. So, so much has happened since then. And the part of the story that I found so inspiring too is that you had to step into a new role. And that new role included you. You had abandoned yourself for so many years and you were a people pleaser. You're an extreme empath. I already know that just from coaching you, and you're such a beautiful person. And it was so hard for me to, I mean, it wasn't hard for me, but it was so beautiful to see what I could see in you. You finally started to believe about yourself because I saw all of the glimpses of who B was in so many different ways. And you could not see it through the depths of your, your misery and your sadness and your pain and depression. And you stepped into now I know you have a pretty good career and you find yourself stepping into responsibilities that you never imagined, and I know it was terrifying and you did it.
Mhm.
And what, through all this though, what skills did you discover that you had all along?
Yeah. Just to tie something into what you just said about how low it was and when we were talking, I remember thinking you would just pour your love into me. And I remember thinking it was so low and I had such little confidence, if not none. I remember thinking, why do you believe in me? Like what is it really that you see? You must be pretending to see something that isn't there because I knew it wasn't there. So I wondered like why do you believe in me? What is it that's there for anyone to see when I don't see anything? So just that's how low it was. There was nothing for me to hang on to for a good while. And thank you.
It was transformational. It was as painful as it was for me to just feel your process because obviously as a coach, we have to step outside, but it was very hard for me what you were going through. I felt your pain, but you also surprised me in so many ways. When I would ask you questions and we would go through just different things that we would go through when I would coach you always surprised me, but I would love to know what surprised you about yourself.
Well, I think what surprised me, maybe not most, but what helped me move forward was doing little things that were like daily actions. Like I had to figure out how to pay a rent. Where do I get a check? And this is, I don't want to say embarrassing, but it was at the time. Little things I didn't know how to do. And then they became bigger actions. And then I figured out how to handle insurance. And if I didn't know how to do it, at least figured out who to call, who to ask. And then there was tax that I knew nothing about. And all these little practical steps that I took made me feel like, well, if I can do these things, is there really anything I can't do? At one point, I remember thinking, well, you can figure everything out. You can ask someone. There's an expert in every field, and it's not hard to ask, and it's not hard to Google. So everything became something I could figure out. And then in that process, I think my confidence grew a little, my peace became a little bit more significant, and my belief in myself and that the future would be okay grew. So it was very tied into practical things in the beginning. And then I ended up with a job that I still have now. I also do coaching, but I have a corporate job and it turns out I'm pretty good at it and people enjoy my company and they like what I do. And so realizing that I had some skills and that I was able to figure things out and that I'm a pretty likable person, I've realized, going back to what I said about you. Why do you believe in me? Well, maybe you saw a human, right? And maybe you saw that I wasn't a lost cause. So it's hard to say one thing that really made the biggest difference, but a lot of little things and a lot of little actions and a little tiny piece of confidence to just figure out how to pay rent made me next time I knew how to do that. So lots of little things just put together over time.
I think so many women underestimate themselves because they haven't been required to step into that power. And I think once you start stepping into that power and you stop abandoning yourself, it's almost like life puts you then in a position where you have no choice. You're moving forward and it starts becoming more automated and it builds confidence and self-assurance. And then what you do is you discover that you were capable all along. What I remember, I don't know if you recall, I'm sure you do because this was something big with you, but every time you mastered something new, do you remember what I had you do so that you could relish in it and feel it in your body?
No, I don't. When you say it, I'm gonna know.
Celebrate the small wins. We worked on that. Of course, because it was something that every time you did something, you weren't used to celebrating it because you were in survival mode and it was just, let me just get through this. And we really worked on you celebrating it. So it actually, you felt it in your body and where your energy goes, your focus goes, right? Where your focus goes, your energy goes. You can say it either way. I believe it both ways because where your focus goes, your focus started to move towards, I can do this. I have the power. It's within me. I can learn this too. And when you started to focus on those things by celebrating every time you did something, what it did is it made you recognize and it brought more possibilities and more reassurance and more confidence. It goes hand in hand, right? It goes both ways. And that's why I feel it's so important to celebrate small little things that you do. And I think women don't do that because we take it for granted. It's like, yeah, so what? I raised 4 kids by myself. I mean, are you kidding me? That's
Mm.
major, and that's what I was trying to get you to see is that once you mastered these small skills and you felt good about them, there's nothing you can't do. And look at what you did. You have a thriving business. You're now coaching, which we always knew that you would because your insight is just, I always told you, your insight every time we work together, just going through different ideas and different possibilities, you always came up with things on your own and you're a genius. I just had to guide you to believe in yourself and believe that you could do all this. And I just guided you. You were
Yeah.
already there. You didn't become a different person. You just tapped into
Mhm.
who you were all along. It's just you had
Yeah.
gone away from her for a little bit, for a short stint, or
Yeah.
say a long stint, but now you're back to yourself. You're doing amazing things and your kids, obviously there's a ripple effect because your kids are thriving and I'm so excited for you. So I would love for you to just tell everyone who you are today.
I think, when you said celebrate the small wins, I think I've become really good at kind of going, when I do a thing or I finish a task at work or any little thing, I go, oh, look at you, you can do things and you did that. And that was just you on your own. I've turned it into gratitude and pride in myself that the struggles I had then are nowhere near struggles now. Like I don't have to think when it's time to pay a bill. I know how to do that. And those were major things back then. And so the bar sort of moves all the time. I don't go, oh, look at you. I'm so proud of you for doing every little tiny thing. But feeling like I have the right to be proud and I have the right to have confidence is a huge difference today. But I do want to say something because you said, what else can you do when it's low? You have no choice but to move forward. But I do want to say we do have a choice and you can give up and it's easy to give up. And I felt sometimes and for some time I felt like I had given up and that I had been given up on, which was devastating. So there is a little bit of a choice and those small actions that you take, it's getting up, getting your kids out, which when it's low like that, those are big tasks or they feel like big tasks. And I didn't give up. And that sense of I just have to survive. I didn't want to give up. That was just not a chance. And there was some pride attached to that too. So I just wanted to say I know how hard it is to do a little thing when you're so low. And I know how close you are to giving up. And it doesn't have to be that way. And reaching out for help is major. And pushing past the reluctance to ask for help or having someone see you at your lowest is something I would say you're going to be glad you did it.
You know what I also remember? I remember it's okay. You would get on a call with me and you felt like you had taken a few steps back. And
Mm.
so when I say that you had no choice but to move forward, you also had people that were relying on you. So I think that's the way you felt is that you had no choice but to move forward. But yes, everybody does have a choice. Thank you for bringing that up. And you chose to forge forward, but that didn't always mean that you were progressively moving forward. There were days that you would say, Tiffany, I
Right.
took 2 steps back. And I want our listeners, and yeah, obviously you understand this now, that that's okay. That's okay to take a couple steps back as long as you have the positive forward movement going and you choose one small thing that you can do to move in that forward direction. You're going to have days that you are a couple steps behind. And it's just keeping your eye on the prize. And we kept doing that. I don't know if you recall, but we kept the eye on the prize and how did you
Mhm.
want to feel and where did you want your life to go? And making you see a positive future out of what you were coming out of. Because being at the bottom of a hole, it's very difficult to see that there's going to ever be any possibility or future or happiness or peace in your life. And like I
Yeah.
said, you've come so far. And now I know I can understand how it must feel to wake up in the morning knowing all that you've accomplished and all, how far you've come. And you know what I'd like to ask you? I'd love to know because I work a lot with boundaries with women and I'd love to know what boundaries do you have today that maybe you didn't have back then?
I think the biggest, I don't know if it's a boundary, but I think I stop and I ask myself, do I care to insert myself into this situation? Whether it's here's someone that says, "Hey, I have to be at an appointment, but I'm late and I don't have a car." And if it doesn't work for me, I no longer offer to help. And I used to be someone that would be like, well, I'll take you and then I'll just burn my own camp down because I'm neglecting what I need to do, but I'll do for you. I don't do that anymore. I stop and I ask myself, is this going to make it worse for me? I'm happy to help everyone I can, but it's got to also work for me. And boundaries in terms of the situation I came out of, I am just so grateful that I no longer care about where he is, what he's doing, who he's with. I was so obsessed with finding out where he was in this very moment. And that feels like a boundary that I have been able to cut the ties and discontinue caring what he does in his life. And I extend that to a lot of other things. Like I said, I just don't have to care so much about things that don't pertain to me. And if they're going to make me miserable, I definitely don't want to care. So I think that's what I've learned most about boundaries.
I love that you're choosing you, finally.
Yeah, I
Right?
guess that's really what it is. I'm choosing me and I'm choosing the things that will work out for me and the people that I am responsible for, my kids.
B, you're just amazing in so many ways. When you look back at that version of yourself, and if you could tell her anything, what would you say to her, knowing what you know?
I would say hold on to someone, allow someone to witness. I think the most difficult thing I could have done, or anyone, I believe this, I think we all have to have a witness to our lives. Speak up, say I'm struggling, say I need help. The biggest help I got throughout my most difficult time was being able to reach out to others. I spoke to you. I had several friends that I would call and say, I actually feel like I'm dying. I can't do more now. And especially when it comes to the trauma bond, I felt like, and I've heard experts say this, it feels like you're dying when you sever the ties. And so if I didn't reach out to a friend, I would have then gotten in the car and tried to chase him down wherever I thought he might be at, which was an impossible task. Just to try to be there for him and help him so that I had a purpose in my life. But that wasn't the purpose that was meant for me. It was devastating me. So I think it's so important that we reach out for help. That helped me. And if you're talking to an expert like I talked to you, you helped me so much. And I will say you got a little tough on me, which at the moment didn't feel amazing. But I also knew that you had to because it's a little bit like a parent to a child. That's enough. Can't you see whatever it was in that moment? But come on now. And if we're too lenient with someone who's not seeing reality, it's maybe not as helpful as it could be. So I remember you being a little tough on me, and I am very grateful for that now. Because I didn't want someone to look at me and be like, you're weak. You're not doing what's required. And so it was important to me that I moved forward and I wanted to have progress for you. So that made it easier in between our sessions to focus on my homework, so to speak.
Yeah, because I wanted you to see that you weren't weak. It's not a matter of what I saw. I wanted you to see that you weren't weak. It was more important for you to see it because I knew deep down inside of you, you were a strong and you are a strong woman and you would get through this. And it was really important for me to make you believe that. They don't call me tough Tiff for nothing. And also, I wanted to hold you accountable. If somebody doesn't hold you accountable, it's hard to do this work alone, especially in the space that you were in. You can't do it alone. And I so appreciate you letting my listeners know that, yes, you have to reach out for help. And it has to be somebody, a coach, a therapist, a friend, it's somebody that you can trust. And I felt like we built a very strong rapport. I trusted you. You were always as open and honest. You didn't hide from the truth. You didn't hide your emotions. You were there. And I know you don't feel like you were there. You were exactly where you needed to be to get to where you are now. And I just want, my listeners to know if you're listening right now and you're in your own storm, I want you to do something. If you could, grab a journal and draw a line down the middle. And on one side, maybe write, what am I losing? And then maybe on the other side, you can write, what might I be gaining? Because sometimes when we become so focused on the loss that we never stop to consider the possibility of what this chapter might be creating for us. And I know that was very hard for you to see. You only thought about everything that you were losing. And I think I really helped you focus on things that you would be gaining. And slowly but surely, you started gaining them, which then, helped you with your confidence. And this may be the most important question of today's episode. So, for the woman listening who is terrified right now, the woman who feels stuck, and the woman who thinks that she'll never be okay, you being a coach as well, but going through this, what would you tell her?
I would tell her, first of all, reach out for help, have someone be there with you. It doesn't really matter how often, just the fact that you know that someone's there to catch you. If you call a coach or a therapist or a friend or anybody, do that. But then I would say, look at the light. There sometimes isn't light. For me, there really wasn't. But even when it's not there, make it up. Look at the future and say, what is one thing that I want? And just believe that you can get it, and then make it as big as you can. And this is where earlier I was talking about feeling delusional, because I tried to tell myself that I had things to believe in, but I didn't at the moment. So I made it up. Look at the light, and even if it's not there, you got to make it up, and it'll grow and it'll become real. It is possible, even at your very, very lowest.
Yes, absolutely. And even though I know the answer to these questions, I'm going to name out 4 questions and I know the answer to them, but I'd love to hear your positivity because your positivity will, just illuminate so many women's lives. Is there light on the other side? Is there peace? Is there joy? Is there freedom?
Heck yes. So much. And I don't want to say that everything for me is now perfect and that I don't struggle and that I don't feel, low energy ever. I do often, but I know how to flip the switch, and I know that I don't want to be there. And I have the choice to work towards the freedom and the peace. And so, yes, to all those questions, it's there, requires a little bit of work. And in the beginning, the work may just be that you speak up, and then it'll grow, and you do a little thing and it'll grow. So yes, absolutely. There's peace, and you can do this.
Amen. Amen. I want to let my listeners know that my intention for you today is so simple. I want you to understand that your current pain is not your permanent destination, and B is a testament to this. And some of the greatest blessings of my life, I know, arrived disguised as devastation. And I grew the most a lot of time through my challenges and my traumas. And you'd grow more through them than you do your victories. And sometimes life removes what you've been too afraid to release yourself. And while it may break your heart initially, it can ultimately save your life. And I believe that your life has been saved. And so I just want to share some key takeaways for today's episode. Pain can become your power. So the very thing that breaks you can also become the thing that rebuilds you. And fear is often the doorway. And everything that B wanted was just on the other side of the fear that she had been avoiding. And also that you are capable. You are absolutely more capable than you think. Sometimes life forces you to discover strengths that you've had all along. And I want to also let you know that betrayal doesn't define you. How you rise afterward does. And there is life on the other side, like you just mentioned. You may not see the light. I love the exercises that you did. So it's not only survival, there's peace, there's freedom, there's confidence, there's joy, and there's the version of yourself that you may not have otherwise met. I know you met a new, amazing, better version of yourself on the other side. And I don't think you're ever going to go back to that other B. I want to thank you so much. You have been an unbelievably, what you've shown through in this episode, I know is just going to help so many women. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you as a person, as a client, as my guest on this podcast. You were one of my very first clients, and we worked a lot, and you came so far. And I'm so blessed to know you. You just empowered so many women, and I want to thank you.
Thank you. You're the best.
I adore you. And thank you to everybody else. And I will be speaking to you, I'm sure, next week because we have some catching up. But thank you so much, B. We will talk soon.